Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this, which should have been the first face-to-face meeting in 2 years, but unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond our control, it wasn't to be. So we are still working hard and trying to get together a face-to-face in-person meeting in the near future. So please watch this space. This evening, a fascinating topic and an amazing project, and one which I was lucky enough to have been involved in at various points in its progress. I'll introduce our speaker momentarily, but just before we kick off, please, any questions that you have, post in the Q&A box, which you'll find in the bar at the bottom of your screen. We'll then collate them and then ask Boris the questions at the end of the presentation. In terms of our speaker today, Boris Kamstra has a BSc in Civil Engineering from UCT and an MBA from WITS, but I guess we won't hold that against him. He's worked variously in Malawi, DRC, Angola, Central African Republic, and other exotic destinations, and has held a multitude of roles in a number of different commodities. He's currently the Chief Operating Officer for Premium Nickel Resources in Botswana, and prior to that spent 7 years leading and developing the Besia project for Alphamin Resources, both directly and via his concurrent role as a director of Pangaea Denham Capital. Boris has also spent time as a game ranger at Mala Mala in his early career, for which I'm very jealous. And the axiom which defines Boris's various career roles, as it appears on his LinkedIn profile, is Madiba's quote, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And this mantra is demonstrated very clearly in the topic of the talk tonight, an improbable success, which this project really was, and you'll see why as Boris's presentation progresses. Boris, over to you.
Thank you, Russell. The members of the South African Institute of Mining and Metallurgy are the custodians to keys to a powerful economic engine and multiple engines. A mine has the power to dramatically improve the quality of life for all who live around where it is built and operate. Tonight, I will not be so presumptuous as to talk to your craft. I'll rather tell a story of a remarkable and somewhat improbable success that could only come about due to guidance from members of this institute. Our story starts when it's located in the center of Africa, in a province called North Kivu. It is an area of extraordinary beauty and abundance, a beautiful lake on its eastern side with towering volcanoes, a spine of mountains running down its center, which separates an ocean of tropical forests and deep, clear rivers that host creatures of all sorts, many of which probably have yet to be documented, some of which are endemic to the area, and we know only too well, the okapi and Greer's gorilla. It is also home to some of the most industrious, hardworking and curious people I've had the privilege of working with. Regrettably, when our project started, smiles were hard to find. The reason started somewhat to the east in a small country called Rwanda, where in 1994, 8,000 people were macheted to death every day for 100 days. This genocide rippled out through East Africa and catalyzed the First and the Second Congo Wars. During the Second Congo War, it is estimated that 5.4 million people were killed. 2 million people were displaced, and once the war had settled down, 100,000 people died daily from easily preventable diseases. This death toll is second only to World War II, and yet it was confined to an area of only 200,000 square kilometers, and happened in a far shorter time. One can only imagine the horror of trying to live through a period like this. rogue military units, armed militia, and then ultimately village and clan self-defense units, who, as men are wont to do in an environment of lawlessness and given arms, went rogue in the pursuit of profit and pleasure with the weapons that they had been armed with. And all this fighting was fueled and supported by the minerals that are available in North Kivu province. And one of the minerals was a commodity called tin. Now, tin enjoyed an enormous resurgence of popularity. Yes, it did used to be for tin cans in which you got your food. But with our addiction to electronic gadgets and goods, the glue that holds all the componentry together is solder. It used to be lead. That became problematic when electronics proliferated to the extent that they did, and lead was replaced with tin. Now, tin has been known to man since the Bronze Age, hence the name. Consequently, all the rich, easy to reach deposits have long since been mined out. And yet there remained one place where tin was easily, or tin ore being cassiterite, was easily accessible and of stupendous grades. Initially, the miners there bagged it and sold it to the traders. That is always the case in lawless scenarios where people are armed. As soon as there's a concentration of wealth, the guns follow it. And the armed groups very quickly took control of Besia and ran it through a labor force consisting primarily of slaves by way of indentured labor. People would arrive there, get a loan for some food and some access to a spot to mine. And the conditions for that loan made it that it would never be repayable. Nevertheless, payment had to be made. And the currency of the day at Besia was cassiterite ore. Welcome to your office for the day. It's only about 80 meters to 100 meters deep. Limited support, no light, zero ventilation, and don't bother calling if something happens. There's no help that is going to come. Oh, and just a little twist. You're only allowed to exit if you have produced your quota for the day. If the seam that you were mining happened to no longer be there, that was not much concern to the man with the AK-47 at the mouth of the tunnel. The ore was then sorted, packed into bags, and packed on the heads of porters or their backs for the 40 to 50 kilometer haul through the jungle and some vicious terrain. This hill they call Bonjour because they set out in the early morning going up it. And by the time you got to the top of the hill, even without a bag, my legs were on fire. Working the rest of the route claimed all 10 of my toenails due to the very steep inclines and declines one had to navigate. Its destination was one of the few small little strips of tar that remained in the Walikari territory, on which aircrafts would land. Now, for those of you who are not aeronautical engineers, you may observe that there is something a little odd in the video being played on your screen. You see, there was a little hitch on this runway in that it had a dogleg down the middle. And it only had about a meter on either side of the wheels for the pilots to put the planes down. And the dogleg occurred at either maximum braking on landing or maximum thrust on takeoff. During the course of the artisanal rush, many planes failed to take the dogleg into sufficient heed and ended up being converted into pots and pans by the villagers around. If you were a young man born into this community, what could you have hoped for? This young man, his father was murdered in one of the pillaging raids of the various armed groups. Their family farm was plundered for the umpteenth time. He had basic literacy and went out to seek some way to support his ailing mother. He washed up on the shores of the Seer, where he was sent to drag tin ore out of deep, dark, wet tunnels. What do you suppose his highest aspiration could have been? My guess would be to just survive another day. But fortunately, the world got wind of what was going on at the Seer, largely courtesy of the photographer whose photographs you have been seeing. People went out to verify whether it could be as bad as it was being made out, and to their horror, they found it was just so, and probably worse. Around this time, the world was recovering from the global financial crisis, and banking law was being rewritten, the Dodd-Frank Act. And due to the horror that those who had witnessed the Seer and managed to spread it out into the industry, a portion of Dodd-Frank addressed a newly defined phenomena called conflict minerals, which basically stated that if any product was going to be sold in the United States, they had to be able to verify that every small component in there and the materials from which that component was made had been mined responsibly and ethically. This caused a bit of a problem for the armed groups running the Seer, as it was well intended to do. The price for which they could get their minerals plummeted. To make matters worse for them, they breached the water table. It's very hard to dewater a vertical shaft without any electricity. To further compound their problems, President Kabila issued a mining ban in the North Kivu province. This set the stage for us to walk in onto the scene. You see, we had been given a host of money by Denham Capital, a very large private equity fund in the US, to invest in promising mining projects in and around Africa. We looked hard, very hard, at Alphaman and believed that provided we were able to meet 5 criteria, it could be potentially a fairly reasonable investment. First and foremost was community support. We were told the community were hostile. I think they were initially. And this hostility was used often against us. And my cynical self believes that what was being attempted was for us to carve a special deal with those who historically had mined the Seer and allow them access to a portion of the ridge. The second was to get into production quickly. The cessation of activities at Seer had severely hurt the local economies, as one would imagine it would. And when we went to Kinshasa, feeling quite proud of ourselves for having actually got there and back and devised what we thought was a fairly respectable plan to do our geology and exploration program, the Minister of Mines sneered at us and said, people from the local villages with buckets and spades have been mining that hill for years. How is it that all of you with all your big money and your fancy degrees can't do the same? So clearly the pressure was on. Thirdly, many people in the clampdown on conflict minerals, many users, smelters, and end users had been caught on the wrong side of the whole conflict mineral debacle as it rolled out. And were very nervous of anything that smelt of potential conflict status. We now had to convince them that we were going to produce a responsible tin product from the very place that had been the catalyst for conflict minerals worldwide. This proved to be a task a lot harder than we initially estimated. Due to the heuristic risk that people associate with North Kivu, we figured that the maximum amount of money we'd ever be able to raise would be about 200 million rand, dollars. And of that, we had always expected that the large development finance institutions would be providing a fair dose in that, isn't this what they were set up to do? And lastly, clearly, for anyone who supported us in this venture, they had to realize a very high return on their capital. What all these things meant is that we had to do it fast, which required us to run processes in parallel. In essence, we envisaged the kind of mine that we were going to build and set everybody off with no trade-off studies, no optimization. We said, this is it. This is what it's going to do. It's going to do 33,000 tons a month head feed, and it's going to be underground mine. Start designing, and we'll get a resource somewhere down the track. And the metallurgy, don't worry, you use some other examples. And this is where members of this institute were phenomenal in picking up the ball and running with us to make it happen. The fundamentals to us were fairly simple. There was an intrusive granite, came through the metasediments. It pushed tin-bearing fluids out along the structures. This was verified by drill holes and artisanal working. Some great intercepts showed that it was pretty much continuous. There were a few breaks we weren't sure about. And sort of back of the envelope type sketches gave us what we thought the profile would be. Our investment thesis was bold and brazen and sneered at by many in the tin industry. We said we were going to get 100,000 tons contained tin at a head feed of 2% for our initial phase. And bear in mind, we didn't have the time to be able to properly explore the entire ridge. I maintain to this day that the position of the mine is probably suboptimum. There is, I believe, a far better ore body in that ridge. We've yet to find it, but it's doing pretty damn well at the moment, if you ask me. So we went to our investment committee, and after a year of due diligence confirming these parameters were achievable, we decided to make an investment. At 3:30 in the morning on the 27th of December 2013, we closed the first hostile private placement on the TSX Venture Exchange ever. Early in 2014, drilling began in earnest. Now, yeah, I know that's not a drill, that's a helicopter. The reason for that helicopter is it was the only way that we were able to move our rigs around the site and our people to and from the site. By mid-year, the drills were churning out core, and we were continually astounded at the intersections they were receiving. Things were looking great. A month later, things took a turn for the worst. Those that had profited from Besia in the past grew frustrated with all of the various activities that were ongoing to try and prize us off the ridge. And they decided, probably with a nod and a wink from those that had benefited in Kinshasa, to launch an attack on our camp. They flattened our camp, they destroyed all the drill core boxes, taking, of course, the terrific cassiterite intersections of which we were so proud. $13 million went up in smoke. When we went to Kinshasa to complain to the Minister of Mines, he was vaguely receptive, but I think he had us in one ear and had those that were benefiting in the past in the other. So just to be sure, we kept the Prime Minister well informed of our plans, of what had happened, just to help him steer the minister down the center line. At the end of our stay there, a white Lancia Gamma stopped next to me. I was picked up, put in the back of the car, and driven to the backwaters of Kinshasa, where I was told in no uncertain terms that stealing from the Congolese people was a pretty poor idea. The knife on my throat certainly reinforced the point. It took us a while to dust ourselves off and get ourselves back together again, and most importantly, to be comfortable that it was safe to send our people back out to the ridge. Once so, we allocated 40,000 meters of diamond core to be drilled, logged, and assayed, and that was the sum total. On this, we were going to have to build a mine. The initial results certainly were continuing to be promising. The terrain, which was very, very steep with a massive rainfall, and the high cost of diesel steered us towards this going to be an underground mine, despite what looked like an absolutely atrocious hanging wall that came out of the met samples. Initially, we thought we'd probably need 2 declines to give us the required run of mine. Our process flow sheet was based largely on San Rafael, the real true royalty king of the tin world. And at that point, the shining star of the developing tin world, a company called Casbah, who had a project in Morocco, primarily concentrated and done by jigs, later on down the flow sheet, cleaned up by way of flotation. So plans for the mine were to come together. However, there was a small issue. To build a mine, one needs loads and loads and loads of heavy equipment. And one needs a way to get it there. You can't chop everything in, albeit that we did actually explore these options. Let me introduce you to the N3. This is the National Route 3 between Goma and Walikali. And yes, it is a road. And if you put a truck on that, you will pay road tax. The road going north was not much better. Bridges were in disrepair and there were similar washouts. So we had to pin our hopes initially on the N3. The only way we were able to get trucks through was to get the truck train. It was an issue of joining old military trucks together on the toll bar. To give you a sense of scale, the bottom of the windscreen of the truck coming through the puddle is 2 meters above the ground. These were some of the final trucks to make this journey. After this, we gave up. But it allowed us time to fix the road to the north and bring in the rest of the containers. So about 100 loads came through this way. The remaining 700 came from the north. Having addressed the access to the proximity of the mine, there was a small matter of linking the mine to the N3, where 40 kilometers of the most dense tropical jungle and the most vicious terrain stood in our way. There were no survey plans for us to consult and pick our optimum alignment. The only way was walking, and we walked those jungles for about a week, and many times having to rewalk sections because the GPS that we were using to track our routes could not get signal through the jungle canopy. Now, to build a road, one generally needs heavy equipment. To get heavy equipment there, you need a road. To break this catch-22, we turned to the remarkable ingenuity and work ethic of our hosts and aligned it with our strategy to maximize the number of people who could be deriving benefit from our presence in the area. We built 40 kilometers of road through this forest, including some of these most remarkable timber structures, including this viaduct and a few bridges over rivers that we weren't able to negotiate our way around. We used the felled timber to build all of the structures that we needed on site and much of the furniture that was used to furnish them. Again, using the skills available locally and ultimately ending up with a product that had a greater resonance with our hosts than a flat-pack Insta office type scenario would have had. Need communications. Initially, we used satellite phones. They worked very well until the perpetual thunderstorms would roll over. So we turned to Vodacom and asked them to give us some connection of some sort. Their solution was the small mast you see in this picture, which worked absolutely superbly for a couple of months. And then we couldn't get dialing tone. Our calls were dropped. It was a disaster. Walking around the village nearby, it soon became apparent why. The ever ingenious entrepreneurs that lived around us had figured out that this was a source of potential revenue. A few solar cells, some car batteries. Now he could charge you to recharge your phone. There are no wall sockets in the Walikali territory. They also sold airtime and did banking, as the M-Pesa badge on his table attests to. The problem being, the mast was designed for about 150 connections. It was trying to deal with 1,000. Another one of the unintended consequences of this mast was a dramatic improvement in the security of the area, in that the preferred modus operandi of the armed groups that terrorized the neighborhoods was one of stealth and surprise, which becomes a little tricky if the village that you have just marauded through can warn that and the neighbors around that you're on your way. So they moved on to areas of easy picking and let us be. We did what most responsible mining companies do and engaged in as many community projects as possible, building this school to replace a wattle and daub structure that had previously been there. We worked with the local farmers to source as much produce as is possible for our messes from fields that they were tilling. All the while, Kinshasa kept telling us how atrocious we were, how the communities hated us, and that this was becoming a real problem. And then something really odd happened. But just to give you a bit of background to it, in the Congo, the local music is a very powerful conveyor of community sentiment, to the extent that the politicians actually have on their payroll some of the best artists and bands to perform at their gatherings. And after having returned from being berated for the umpteenth time by the minister due to our lack of progress on our community issues, I received an email that made my blood run cold. All it said was, there is a song about Alphaman on the radio. Now, we are trained to a degree to deal with bad press, to deal with hostile reporters. But in an environment like this, where music is so powerful, a conveying of sentiment, how does one deal with a protest song? We asked our team to get a recording of it so that we can digest it and try and figure out how bad is it, what can we do. I'm going to play you a snippet of some of them and a brief translation of what they were about.
Aha, Alpha Mine, ebano betange muchaka batange tamu mwerimya. Maendeleo yetu ni Alpha Mine, mabadiliko kwetu ni Alpha Mine, maisha mapya, maisha mapya kwa mtaa wa Walikale, maisha mapya,
Turns out it was a song of praise, not a protest song, and it was not alone.
Bad bitch, you are the king of the king with the massacre on the beat. Play swag music, yeah. Ben on the beat, oh.
Walikale et Alpha Mine jusqu'à la fin. Unissons-nous pour le développement de notre territoire. Ja for the big Z. Hasala Visala. I'm the hero man. DJ Ben Beach. Okay. PDG Ramazan Kokoli.
Hapa naipenda, siwezi kuitenga kwa mambo inayotenda. Alfa mine ni ya kwanza, kuna Kivu ya kwanza, societe munene. Alfa mine muje tutumike.
Where in the world have you ever heard of a mining company having a song of praise written, recorded, and broadcast spontaneously by the community in which they operate? We had not one, but two. Clearly, we were doing something right. However, now the obligation to make this mine happen was really on us. It was not just our shareholders who were expectant of this mine to come in operation. The communities around us were now also relying on us. And we had to set to work to try and raise the money that was required. All along, we had been bit funded. We would be funded for a portion of work, and provided the results were sort of in line with what we had predicted, we would then have to go and beg for the rest amount of money. My knees developed calluses over those years. A big component of the required funding was going to be debt finance. Our shareholders were not able, nor had the stomach, to stump up the entire amount. It was with deep regret that we established that the development finance institutions have a risk appetite far lower than the most rapacious commercial merchant bank. So we headed off looking to try and find alternative sources of debt finance. However, in order to do this, we had to get political risk insurance for North Kivu DRC. Yeah, right. The only place where this might be available was London. We headed off and presented to a boardroom full of, I assume, were underwriters. I wasn't ever really introduced to each one specifically, but I knew our future lay in their hands. At the end of the presentation, the gentleman very politely looked up and he said, well, sounds like a very interesting project. We wish you well, but the risk is far too high for our appetite. I could see everything disappearing as he closed his book. And I said to him, hang on a minute. I said, do you know that for me, the most risky day of my life happened this morning? The look on his face clearly meant I needed to explain a little further. I said, me and thousands of other people on the way here descended into the bowels of the earth, were shoved into a very, very tight train, people under each armpit snorting and coughing. At no point in that entire experience was it evident where there was an escape exit, what one should do in the event of an emergency. If this train stopped deep under the city of London, do we go to the station we came from? Do we go to the one we were going to? I said two things are guaranteed to happen. Firstly, this is a no-brainer for a terrorist attack. There are too many people on too regular a basis coming and going. And secondly, nature does not accommodate monoculture to this extent and intensity, and there's going to be an epidemic at some point. Regrettably, both of those predictions came true. However, we did get our political risk insurance and ultimately the debt we required. However, to top off our funding package, we needed some more equity. And we'd been promised a fair amount of money should we do a parallel listing in Johannesburg. At one of the press briefings, one of the well-known mining journalists kind of said, you know, isn't this project a little risky for South African investors? So I looked at him and said, well, let me guess. Does your car have a satellite tracker? Does your home have an electric fence on the walls around it. I assume it has an alarm and a panic button next to your bed to allow you to sleep comfortably at night. I said, that is the same as my home, and it is what we require to sleep in Johannesburg. Whereas when I'm at Besia, I sleep on that ridge in a tent, and I leave the doors open so I can hear the sounds of the jungle and get the cool breeze. Which is safer? The headline the next day: sometimes you just can't win. So this is a timeline of pretty much how things went from our due diligence, our initial exploration. The light blue line was the ultimate share price, and the dark blue line, the tin price. All along, we were running processes in parallel. And largely, the calls that were made by members of the SIMM right up front did not change through this entire process. It was just as the data came in, it verified the choices and decisions that they had made. There were only two components that we changed. The one was we believed that we would need to do sub-level caving given the poor condition of the host rock. Once we got underground, that looked a little hairy, so we went to a cut and fill as a stopgap whilst we developed a new mining process, which is currently a retreat long hole open stope with backfill. And we stopped the tin float for tables. So from drilling in earnest in early 2014 to the first dividend, which was paid early this year, the period was 8 years. I have been told that developing a mine from greenfields in areas like Rustenburg can take between 10 and 15 years. And I think this is testimony to the skill that resides within this institute. Before I end, I would like to reintroduce you to a young man that we met earlier. He did survive. And when the warlords and guns had moved on, he badgered us constantly for a job. His skills were not ones that we had much use for, so we employed him as a waiter. And he was a brilliant waiter. In fact, he was a bit of a problem because he would work way past his knock-off time. When he saw us building the plant, he realized that there was a far bigger future for him down there than serving tables, and again pestered us to transfer him to the bottom. He had taught himself English in intermediate period, which was useful to us. So we sent him down to the mill to clean the spill and keep an eye on it. His questioning and learning didn't stop. I'd like to introduce you to Alfonso Makeba Abokaba, one of our plant operators. At his fingertips is $1 million of production every day. And he reports to our in-country Met manager, Eric Chimanga, who has a thirst for knowledge, the likes of which I have seldom encountered before. So at the end of your days, when you put your pens down, know that you have changed a part of the world for the better for many.
Mr. Kamstra, what can I say? One of the attendees commented in the chat box while you were showing, or just after you'd played those songs, and he said it actually brought tears to his eyes, and I share the sentiment. It has from the beginning, from when we first unearthed that, and you shared it with us. It still to this day brings goose flesh up on my arms. I think this thing is a testament to yourself and the team that you so ably led from the beginning to completion. What more can I say? going to open it up for questions, but I'll lead with the first one. You indicated your plan initially was a 2% resource, 100,000 tons. What did that end up at?
Russell, that ended up at 4.5%, thank goodness. Yeah, 130,000 on the first cutoff. And I think that mine will continue running for the next probably 60 years, I would imagine, probably more. I think that hill is lousy with tin, and I think every time you put a drill into it, you come up with these most extraordinary intersects. So I think, already they've announced that Mpama South is going ahead. It's going to be a replica of the Mpama North project, which completely eliminates all of your implementation risk, in that many of the people there built the previous one. They know how to build it, they know how to operate it. We've worked out the issues on the mining. Our logistics are running as smooth as silk. So, for me, this is going to be one of those iconic mines that keeps going for a very long time.
And the logistics route for the concentrate?
That goes up via Kisangani. Regrettably, the road from Walikali to Goma, we put about $15 million into trying to get it into a state that was usable. It goes past the hills in Masisi, which are extremely steep. One of your biggest problems is soil creep. So as soon as you start excavating for your road, 2 kilometers of mountain come at you, and it gets very hard to stabilize those slopes. They're also very thick, deep black soils, clay soils, which are nearly impossible. So we fixed the bridges going north, and devised what I thought was quite a clever solution, in that the Bailey bridges were perpetually collapsing due to trucks in the DRC are not loaded until the springs have no clay left in them, which gives them a capacity of about 85 ton. And those Bailey bridges generally at 35 to 40 ton. So, and also they stack the roofs up, so that the truck goes into the bridge, gets jammed against the struts on the top. The obvious solution is to take the struts off. I mean, why wouldn't you? So you reduce what was a box girder into a U-shaped girder, overload it, and it ends up in the river. So what we figured, we couldn't exactly put big concrete bridges, but we went out and we post-stressed all the Bailey bridges. So their capacity now is probably 85, 90 tons. And since the last debacle, we've yet to have a problem on any of them. Post-stressing also makes it rather hard for anyone to remove any component from it. So that goes up to Kisangani, and then out to Kampala, through Uganda to Mombasa.
I can see the civil engineer coming out in you there. You're the inherent bridge builder. Okay, there's some feedback for you that I'd love to share with you. There's a couple of comments. One says that was beyond amazing. Another beautifully presented. This is not the story of a mine, but a story about people and endurance. Well done to you and your team.
Well, I thank everyone for giving me the time to, and really, this is a story of the team, and Russell, you were an integral part of it, as were probably many other people on the webinar this evening. I just get to tell the story, so thank you all for that.
Well, another comment that I do need to share with you, and thanks, Mike, an ex office bearer for the Institute of many years, and an honorary fellow. He says, Russell, you can say this is the best presentation the Johannesburg branch of the SIMM has ever had. Many thanks, exceptional. Well,
I thank you very much for the sentiment.
So the accolades are coming through. A question, after the success mentioned, is there government support now?
Sorry. There is huge local government support. The government of North Kivu, we are the only source of revenue, and they've become rather accustomed to the couple of $100,000 that roll through their door every month. It's probably into the millions of dollars at the moment. But for them actually to help us, no. Generally, they're parliamentarians that go out and bash whatever we're doing in an attempt to garner votes. So regrettably, I think it's tricky. I think there are people in government who support us or support our government very strongly, but politicians being politicians, they will find a niche and decide which one they're going to use to make it to their benefit. Alphaman spends about $2.5 million every year in community development projects, many of which are a laborious process in identifying them that the communities have to nominate, have to then propose and support their nomination. Primarily the thrust is on schools. The thirst for knowledge and desire for education for people there is huge. So we've built, I think when I was last there, we unveiled the third school, and never underestimate people. At the opening, a gentleman came out with typical DRC type shirt, collar hanging on, threads holding the rest of the shirt together, and walked up to the microphone, and you held your breath for fear that you may not be able to be coherent. His opening statement was, we carve our grievances in stone and write our gratitude in water. It's time to change.
Powerful words.
From a man who looked like he wandered out of the forest and probably would not be able to utter a coherent sentence. If this project has taught me anything, never underestimate people.
Very, very valid. Another question, if you could do it again, what one thing would you have done differently? Not that I'm sure you would wish the last 7 years to repeat them, although the success is amazing, but it's taken its toll, I have no doubt.
I'm not sure what, obviously one would have liked to have had all the money up front so that you could concentrate on delivering the project as opposed to running around the world. And the stress that perpetual running out of money induced on our team was enormous. Our team, including contractors, staff, everyone. There were many times where under IFRS we could have been considered to be trading recklessly, but it was the only way we could get it done. And I think, but I don't think it's realistic to ever hope that people would say, okay, here's $200 million, go out and make it happen. I think they were always going to hedge their bets to see if you could make the milestone that you had said that portion of capital would get to. Other than that, I don't really know. I'm sure, look, there were many things that we could have changed. I probably should have not let some things go through that I did, just in terms of some aspects of construction methodology and some other things. But, we had an awesome team, and you had to put your confidence in them and make the space to allow them to go and do what they're best at doing. And man, did they do it well.
Yeah. Okay, the original BCA resource included zinc, copper, and gold. Are these produced as a byproduct? And PS, great presentation.
Regrettably, they're contaminant. So our plant is set up to recover tin, so it's primarily a gravity plant. And the coppers report in the sulfur, which we remove in the process, because we get serious credits serious penalties for any of those elements in the tin concentrate. So no, over the hill there's the Marty gold mine. It's probably 20 k's away, if that. So there's definitely gold in the area. I don't think we've hit anything that was of a grade that we'd consider mining. There was a zinc anomaly that looked really good, but again, we haven't really focused on that at all. I think it's always been a strategy of securing the beachhead and then slowly working forward from that. So only now are we putting our people in decent accommodation, up to date. You know, if you went to Visalia, you slept in the tent. We just didn't have the money to put in nice staff accommodation. Fortunately, that is changing now, and we can start splashing out of it. So I think ultimately, once that all settles down, I think there's certainly polymetallic deposits and opportunities that exist in the area, but not currently.
Okay, and then finally a question from another old friend who has also been in one of those tents that you speak about. John Buckley says, Boris, I have the deepest respect of what you and the team have achieved over the years. A brilliant presentation.
Well, I thank John for his insights and guidance in a period where we were switching from our much beloved sub-level caving, or much terrified and feared. And it was only with John's guidance that we were able to make the transition smoothly. And I think he is an example of the depth of knowledge and experience that resides in this institute.
Awesome, Boris. Well, that's all in terms of questions and comments. I can only reinforce and reiterate what everyone else has said. That was an absolutely stunning presentation. And you delivered everything which I hoped and suspected and was confident you would do for us. Thank you again.
I thank you very much, and thank you everybody for allowing me the opportunity to tell the story of a most remarkable team.
It really is. It really is. So I'm going to hand over. I'm going to hand over then to Donnie, our branch chairman, just to close out. Donnie, over to you.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you very much. Boris, a song of praise. It is fantastic.
Donnie, thank you.
Wow, what a story. A real history story, starting a mine in a real difficult area. And if, you know, we talk very easily in our environment, we don't want to go to that area because of that. Man, I don't think anybody had ever the privilege of doing what you did and finish it. A project manager must master the skills, about 44 skills in his life in his project. But I think that if those guys that worked out that 44 skills list listen to the story tonight, they're going to stop at 88. So I wish I could vote you in as president, so that we can have all those skills in one body at the top. And you know, we always say we would like somebody on top that really kicked the stones, and there is it. Thank you very much, Boris. Congratulations on your huge success. The SIMM would like to present you with a small gift for a very, very big successful presentation. This is the sample. Russell will deliver the real thing. So,
along with a couple of beers, I think, are in order.
Count me in. Guys, thank you very much. Russell, thank you very much for getting Boris to the table. It is really, really, really phenomenal. I would have liked tonight to be our first hybrid meeting. But yes, we tried, didn't work. Next time we will succeed. Guys, and Boris, please don't be scarce. We need people like you very nearby. Thank you very much. And for a South African guy to be such a success, that's a story to be told. Right, guys, thank you very much, and have a good evening. Russell, back to you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Terrific. Boris, thank you very much again. We'll catch up shortly. Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye-bye.